Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a spicy show for you today, this Tuesday morning, I believe it is. Hello, Briahna.
Hello, Robby.
Let's get right to it. Feelings about the war in Gaza playing out across the nation today, the second eve of Passover, and as with so many social movements before, from the Vietnam War to apartheid in South Africa, students are leading the way with their voices after police arrested over 100 pro-Palestine protesters at Columbia University. Now, these protests have spread to campuses across the country.
We don't need a microphone!
At New York University, professors came out in solidarity with students, and police were ordered to zip tie and arrest professors as they protected some students, some of whom were engaged in prayer. The faculty released a statement via the American Association of University Professors, which argued that, quote, there was no intimidation or anti-Semitism expressed from the plaza until police moved in. Then intimidation was extremely violent. They went on to emphasize that the point of the protest was to, quote, express support for the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank, to publicize NYU's complicity in the genocide of the Palestinian people, NYU's investment in weapons manufacturing that facilitates genocide, and NYU's legitimation of the Israeli state policy of settler colonialism with its site in Tel Aviv.
The cops completely ambushed us. It was 6:40 a.m. Most people were still asleep when the cops decided to come in from multiple directions.
So at this point, the New Haven Police Department is letting them do their thing, as long as it remains nonviolent and peaceful.
At Yale, police placed protesters' wrists in zip ties earlier yesterday and made students get on to buses to receive summonses for trespassing. Other students from other universities, from Harvard and University of Michigan to Berkeley, had encampments pop up as well. It's been less than a week after the arrest at Ground Zero, Columbia University, and there are no signs that the protests will abate, nor will the furies around the arrest. Student protesters are demanding that their universities divest financial support to Israel and its arms suppliers. Voices supporting Israel and against Hamas are, of course, present in these protests.
At Columbia University, where the protests began last week, Jewish students and professors say they're experiencing anti-Semitism and they are fearful for their lives. Ex-assistant professor Shai Devadai had this to say on X. Earlier today, Columbia University refused to let me onto campus. Why? Because they cannot protect my safety as a Jewish professor. This is 1938. The protests have sparked calls from all corners in Congress. Republican Senators Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley called on President Biden to send the National Guard to crush pro-Palestinian demonstrators. And Tom Cotton of Arkansas sent out this message on X. The nascent pogroms at Columbia have to stop today before our Jewish brethren sit for Passover Seder tonight. If Eric Adams won't send the NYPD and Kathy Hochul won't send the National Guard, Joe Biden has a duty to take charge and break up these mobs. Journalist Bari Weiss joined the fray with this tweet. She wrote, "For a second, imagine that black students at Columbia were taunted with chants of go back to Africa. Or imagine that a gay student at Yale was surrounded by homophobic protesters and hit in the eye with a flagpole." Now, one of Columbia's biggest donors, Robert Kraft, has indicated that he may hold off on further donations. Of course, former President Donald Trump has also weighed in, voicing his opinion about the protests in New York. Let's watch.
What's going on at the college level and the colleges, Columbia, NYU, and others, is a disgrace, and it's really on Biden. He has the wrong signal, he's got the wrong tone, he's got the wrong words, he doesn't know who he's backing, and it's a mess.
Meanwhile, calls for Columbia President Manu Shafiq to step down is occurring on all sides. There's also a lot to unpack here, so let's get started.
All right, so
everyone paying attention to campus protests again.
And I think the main takeaway should be that there are, I think at last count, 4 front page stories or very prominent stories on the New York Times website about these campus protests. 0 stories so far about the 2 mass graves that have been discovered outside of hospitals in the Gaza Strip. And so there is a cynical read of all of this that says People who want to defend Israel's practices would rather fight this battle on college campus, talking about what 18-year-olds are saying as they protest for the rights and interests of Palestinians. But all of these Jewish Voices for Peace, SJP, all of these pro-Palestine groups have been very consistent in saying we want to direct the attention and direct the focus of these protests not to being about free speech, but about the substantive rights that we're fighting for and the people in Palestine who are dying because their human rights are abridged so horribly.
Well, I don't know that they're succeeding in that. I don't know if they're calling attention to what's going on in Gaza so much as they're calling attention to their own antics, to their own actions. I mean, that's what's being talked about because that's what people are interested in, right? I mean, what you're saying, the student protests, the total shutdown of Columbia, now going to remote classes for the rest of the year that's not a news story. That's not.
Yeah, I'm saying that we as journalists can't abridge our responsibilities by saying, well, the students forced us to talk about the students. We have an obligation to talk about why the students are protesting. And they're making very specific demands. That's why I thought it was so important for us to include in the early read the conversation about how students are pushing for divestment from other universities from directly investing in and funding weapons manufacturers that are directly involved in Israel. Notably, this is reporting from Prim Tucker, who we've had on the show, reporter at The Intercept. Columbia undergrads voted 75% to 13% in favor of divesting from companies and institutions implicated in Israel's violence in Palestine. Cornell undergrads voted 2-to-1 ratio for a ceasefire and divestment from weapons companies, including Lockheed Martin and Boeing. This is the real story. It's about the money. When you hear reporting about Robert Kraft, who is the billionaire owner of the Patriots, saying, oh, I don't know that I can give money to Columbia anymore, that's why you're seeing such uniformity.
Isn't that what you want?
That's what you're seeing, so much uniformity in Columbia from their administration. It doesn't matter if there is a brown or Arab woman who is the head of the institution. At the end of the day, all of these institutions are making decisions in what they perceive to be the financial best interest of the institution, insofar as that means donors, making donors happy. And so these donors have enormously more influence than the hundreds of kids that are camping out in tents on their lawn. And yet so little of the focus is why one billionaire should have more influence over the direction of an institution like this than the students that comprise its student body.
Well, they also get, according to Open the Books, $45 billion worth of federal grants and preferential tax treatment on their endowments for Columbia, Northwestern, the Ivy Leagues, et cetera.
And do you think that should be invested in weapons manufacturers that facilitated genocide?
I think they should just not get it at all.
All right. Well, that's a different kind of conversation and exactly not what the conversation that the students are talking about here is. There are really real-world effects that are going on as a consequence of these enormous Ivy League institutions who have endowments, some of which are bigger than most countries in the world, literally multi-billion-dollar endowments when you're talking about universities like Harvard. And they have a direct relationship to the weapons manufacturers that are facilitating the bombing campaigns in Gaza. Bombing campaigns which our own government has said it does not endorse. Remember when Rafah was a red line? Remember when bombing Iran was a red line? These universities are directly implicated in this. And the students and the professors who have come out in their defense, forming a human shield, holding hands around students in prayer to protect them from the police force at NYU. It's a really stunning display of solidarity among all of the groups who are not financially implicated by these kinds of corporatized arrangements.
And they're forming human chains to prevent Jewish students from moving among their midst.
That's not true. They
absolutely did that.
Robby, at NYU, I'm describing a specific incident in which university professors came out and created a circle around students in prayer. A Passover prayer, as they were being attacked by the NYPD, handcuffed and arrested. That's what happened in the United States of America. And I thought that we cared about free speech sitting here on this program. I thought we cared about your rights to protest and articulate your values.
I care about
And college students are being called now for the National Guard to be sent in. Do you know who was killed at Kent State by the National Guard? 3 of the 4 of those students were Jewish students. So who here is really standing up for and protecting the rights and interests of Jewish students as you call for them to be rounded up by the police?
I'm not calling for them to be rounded up by the police.
Well,
I don't think the police should be involved.
Do you agree that you criticize this behavior? Because the administration of NYU... The administration of NYU called those police in. Yeah. And the professors wrote that statement to say this was not a violent protest. This was not an anti-Semitic protest. This was students protesting actual violence
I don't know
in
that it's
Palestine.
not violent or not anti-Semitic, but I don't think the police should be called in to deal with it. I think this is an academic matter. If students don't show up to their classes or to their exams,
it was at
then it can
night.
be dealt with that way.
What are you talking
Well, they're
about?
planning to, I mean, at Columbia, they're planning to occupy the campus until what? Until the right to return
No,
is regranted
the
to
students-
Palestinians displaced from Gaza.
The students are not the ones that called for remote work. The administration is doing that, and some people think
No,
it's
I know that.
as a cudgel to try to make it seem as though the students are actually disrupting the functioning of the university in a way that they, frankly, are not.
They clearly are, though. There's going to be no in-person classes. Compromising the educational processes at the university, and then they're going to complain later that they can't get jobs and we have to pay for their student loans.
Well, it
Great.
seems
Wonderful.
It seems like this is really backfiring. The
On the protesters?
Columbia's choice to be so draconian and authoritarian with their protest immediately has sparked now at least half a dozen other campuses across the country to set up similar kinds of encampments. And there was much more police presence in the New York instance because unlike Columbia, which is on private property, NYU is a university that's obviously embedded in the streets of New York. And so the university president there was able to call the police on these protesters, which is, I think, why it was so important for so many of the adult faculty members to come out and show such strong solidarity with them and for the safety of their students.
Conservatives are still calling for Shafik to resign and the heads of these other universities to resign. Whatever they're doing, they're not appeasing. They're not making pro-Israel people happy with their actions. They think not nearly enough action is being. So it's just one of those cases where they can't please anyone.
I think that's right. I think that if university professors were ethical, first and foremost, but also if they were smart, they would realize that people like Elise Stefanik are not good faith actors. There's nothing you can say to please them. And trying to, undermine the credibility of a really powerful argument being made by your students and undermine their rights to assemble and to do exactly the kind of thing that you're supposed to do at college, which is to learn in class and apply the lessons that you're learning in the very classes that you're taking. The hypocrisy of the university to allow people to major in things like the valedictorian at Berkeley who wasn't allowed to give her speech, to major in the history of colonialism and to major in, take classes that are about applying these kind of movement lessons and then punishing students for doing exactly that is ridiculous.
Yeah, conservatives would say that's,
what conservatives,
what you sow there, having those classes in this.
Let's go back to talking about what conservatives are saying. Conservatives are saying we should send in the National Guard to round up students. They are endorsing these police attacks. Bari Weiss' statement that you read a little while ago seem dramatically in conflict with previous stances that she's had on free speech. Of course, this isn't inconsistent with her actual behavior of hypocrisy, trying to shut down protests and get professors canceled when she in fact was a student herself.
Not so good is going on at the protests because both Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar have taken to Twitter to say that all the bad stuff you're seeing is not the students, but is outside activists among their midst, which for all I know is true. I don't reject that at all. I've spent time at protest movements. I've covered activism on college campuses. And yes, I often feel like there's just this group of permanent activist people who show up and make tents and cause trouble. But that's beside that. Clearly there is not so great stuff going on if they're taking to Twitter to now condemn the protests and say, well, that's not really the students, that's the other stuff going on.
I think what's really important and wonderful is how easily people who are fighting for the rights of Palestinians in good faith are able and willing and excited to condemn any hatefulness or anti-Semitism. Why wouldn't you? The people who you're linked arms in arms with at this protest are overrepresented by Jewish students. Why wouldn't I or any person at these protests be incredibly quick? That is not something to condemn. That's evidence of how inclusive and loving and inspirational, frankly, these protests are. The frontline story should be that there was an interfaith Shabbat dinner and prayer session. That's the event. That's one of the events that these professors were protecting at NYU. And outside agitators, people in Columbia, it was much easier to see because it's a private institution. People who didn't have access to the university, including Shai Davidai, the professor you mentioned, who's under investigation for doxing and attacking students. That's why his key card isn't working anymore.
Oh, so he should be arrested and hauled away.
He wasn't arrested and hauled away. What are you talking about?
Doesn't he have a free speech right to be on the campus as well, to protest and to engage in?
His card was deactivated because he was harassing students and he's under investigation.
Okay, he's harassing students, but the protesters there who they're trying to deal with, they're not harassing anyone.
Yeah, he's a faculty member who has an obligation not to
All
dox
right.
and harass
You
students.
found someone involved in these protests who is worthy of discipline. I'm amazed by it. All right. I think we're going to be talking about this additionally with an expert from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression coming up next.
Robby, answer this question. Do you think the National Guard should be sent in to round up these students per Tom Cotton and a number of conservatives? I'm so glad that you have found somebody you're willing to condemn in the context of this authoritarian
I have no
overreach.
problem
All right,
condemning,
more
nor do
Rising
I
coming
ever.
up after this.